My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm 32 years old. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who hurt you most. For 15 years, I poured my heart, soul, and savings into helping my family build their dream life. I paid for my brother-in-law's business, covered their mortgage payments, and even bought the family cabin that became our gathering place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But when my parents' will was read, everything went to him. Every single thing I had sacrificed for, fought for, and paid for with my own money was suddenly his. The same family who lived off my generosity for years didn't think twice about cutting me out completely. Now they want my personal cabin too, the one thing I kept in my own name. Funny how people show their true colors when there's money involved. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare began. I grew up in Cedar Falls, a small town in northern Minnesota where everyone knew everyone else's business and family loyalty was supposed to mean everything. Our house sat on the edge of town, a modest two-story with chipped paint and a front porch that creaked whenever anyone walked across it. My parents, David and Linda Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan in their 20s with nothing but determination and a fierce belief that family came first, always and forever. My father worked double shifts at the paper mill while my mother cleaned houses for the wealthier families on the other side of town. They spoke broken English mixed with Mandarin, especially when they were tired or stressed, which was most of the time. Despite their struggles, they managed to save enough to buy our little house when I was 5, and I still remember the day we moved in. My mother cried happy tears as she swept the empty rooms, whispering prayers of gratitude in Mandarin while my father stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, trying to hide his own emotion. I have one sibling, my older brother Kevin, who is 4 years my senior. From the moment I could understand family dynamics, it was clear that Kevin held a special place in our household hierarchy. Not because my parents loved him more, but because he carried the weight of being their firstborn son in a culture that placed enormous expectations on male children. Kevin was supposed to be the one who would care for our aging parents, carry on the family name, and ensure our lineage continued with honor and prosperity. But Kevin had other plans. He was a dreamer, the kind of person who could talk for hours about big ideas but struggled with follow-through. In high school, he wanted to be a musician and spent most of his time writing songs and playing guitar in garage bands that never quite made it past the garage. Our parents tolerated this phase, believing he would eventually grow out of it and settle into something more practical. When he graduated, they expected him to take over the small grocery store they had managed to purchase after years of saving every penny. Instead, Kevin announced that he was moving to Minneapolis to pursue music full-time. The fight that erupted that night shook our house to its foundation. My father shouted in Mandarin while my mother sobbed, and Kevin stormed out, declaring that he wouldn't be trapped by their old-fashioned expectations. He left the next morning with his guitar and a duffel bag, leaving behind devastated parents and a grocery store they couldn't manage alone. That's when I stepped up, though I was only 14 at the time. After school and on weekends, I worked at Chen's Market, learning how to stock shelves, manage inventory, and handle the cash register. My parents were grateful but heartbroken. Their son had abandoned them, and now their daughter was sacrificing her teenage years to keep the family business afloat. I didn't mind the work. In fact, I discovered I had a natural aptitude for business, understanding profit margins and customer service in ways that came intuitively to me. The turning point came during my junior year of high school when Kevin returned home with a surprise. He was engaged to a woman named Jessica Martinez, a bubbly blonde from Minneapolis who worked as a receptionist at a dental office. Jessica was sweet enough, but she had this way of looking at our modest home and small-town life with barely concealed pity, as if she was doing us a favor by associating with us. Kevin announced that they wanted to get married in Cedar Falls and hoped our parents would help with the wedding costs. My parents were overjoyed. Their prodigal son had returned, and he was bringing them a daughter-in-law who might give them grandchildren. They immediately began planning an elaborate wedding that would cost far more than they could afford. When I gently suggested that perhaps Kevin and Jessica should contribute to their own wedding expenses, my mother looked at me with disappointment and said, "Sarah, this is what families do. We support each other when it matters most." The wedding cost $12,000, money my parents borrowed against the store and their house. I contributed $3,000 from my own savings, money I had earned working at the store and from my part-time job at the local diner. I was 17 years old, but I understood that this wedding was important to my parents' happiness, and I wanted to help make it special. Jessica looked beautiful in her elaborate dress, and Kevin seemed genuinely happy as they exchanged vows in the small church where our family had attended services since moving to Cedar Falls. After the wedding, Kevin and Jessica settled into a rental house 3 blocks from our parents' home. Kevin took a job at the hardware store, claiming he was ready to embrace responsibility and build a stable life. Jessica talked about wanting children and becoming part of our tight-knit family. For a few months, everything seemed perfect. Family dinners every Sunday, holiday celebrations that felt warm and complete, and the sense that Kevin had finally found his place in our family structure. But perfection never lasts, especially when it's built on unstable foundations. Kevin lasted exactly 6 months at the hardware store before quitting, claiming his boss didn't appreciate his creative input and innovative ideas. Jessica supported his decision, insisting that Kevin was too talented to waste his gifts on manual labor. They announced that Kevin would start his own landscaping business, specializing in creative garden design for upscale clients. The business idea wasn't entirely without merit. Kevin did have an artistic eye, and Cedar Falls was experiencing a small economic boom as city residents began buying vacation homes on the nearby lakes. Wealthy retirees and summer residents might indeed pay premium prices for professionally designed outdoor spaces. The problem was startup costs. Commercial lawn equipment, a work truck, business insurance, marketing materials, and initial operating expenses would require significant capital investment. Kevin presented his business plan to our parents over Sunday dinner, complete with hand-drawn sketches of potential garden designs and optimistic revenue projections. He needed $15,000 to get started, money our parents didn't have after the wedding expenses and ongoing store operations. That's when Kevin turned to me with a smile that I would later recognize as calculated manipulation. "Sarah," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, "you've always been the smart one with money. You understand business better than anyone in this family. I know you've been saving for college, but think about this as an investment in our family's future. When the landscaping business takes off, I'll pay you back with interest, and you'll still have plenty of time to go to college later." I was 18 years old, scheduled to start community college in the fall with plans to transfer to the University of Minnesota for business school. My savings account contained exactly $16,000, accumulated through 4 years of working at the store, the diner, and carefully managing every penny I earned. That money represented my escape route, my chance to build a life beyond Cedar Falls and create opportunities my parents never had. But Kevin wasn't just asking for a loan. He was asking me to believe in him, to show faith in our family bond, and to prove that I was willing to sacrifice for the greater good. My parents watched expectantly, and I could see the hope in their eyes. Their son needed help, and their daughter had the means to provide it. In their minds, this was what family loyalty looked like. Jessica added her own persuasion, talking about how successful landscaping businesses in Minneapolis charged hundreds of dollars per hour for design consultations. She painted pictures of Kevin becoming the premier garden designer for wealthy lake homeowners, eventually expanding into hardscaping and outdoor lighting. The business would grow so quickly that my initial investment would be returned within 2 years, she promised. Against every instinct I had developed through years of careful financial planning, I agreed to lend Kevin the money. The decision felt wrong even as I was making it, but the pressure of family expectations and the guilt of having money when my brother needed help overrode my logical concerns. We drew up a simple promissory note stating that Kevin would repay the $15,000 within 3 years at 4% annual interest. I withdrew the money from my college savings account and handed Kevin a cashier's check, watching my carefully accumulated nest egg disappear in an instant. My parents beamed with pride, talking about how generous and wise their daughter was, how this investment would benefit the entire family. Kevin hugged me tightly and promised that he would never forget my generosity and faith in his abilities. The landscaping business, Chen Gardens, launched with great fanfare. Kevin purchased a used truck, commercial-grade lawn equipment, and printed professional brochures featuring his artistic garden designs. He rented a small storage unit to house his equipment and registered the business with the appropriate state and local authorities. For the first few months, everything seemed to be progressing exactly as planned. Kevin landed several small jobs, mostly lawn maintenance contracts that provided steady but modest income. He designed and installed a flower garden for the local bank president's wife, earning praise for his creative vision and attention to detail. Jessica handled the business bookkeeping and customer service, creating an efficient system for scheduling appointments and managing client communications. But as I learned more about the actual operations of Chen Gardens, I discovered that Kevin's optimistic revenue projections were largely fantasy. The wealthy lake homeowners he had planned to target already had established relationships with landscaping companies from larger cities. Local residents appreciated his work but weren't willing to pay premium prices for garden design services. Most of Kevin's income came from basic lawn care, which required significantly more physical labor than he had anticipated and generated much lower profit margins than his original business plan projected. By the end of the first year, Chen Gardens was barely breaking even. Kevin worked long hours during the summer months but struggled to find consistent work during the fall and winter seasons. He had expanded too quickly, purchasing expensive equipment that sat unused during the slow months, while still requiring monthly payments. The business checking account hovered near zero, and Kevin began asking for extensions on his loan repayment schedule. I was attending community college at this point, working part-time at the family store to help cover my reduced course load. Expenses. My original plan to transfer to the University of Minnesota had been postponed indefinitely since my college savings were tied up in Kevin's business. I tried to remain optimistic about the loan repayment, believing that the second year of operations would be more successful as Kevin learned from his initial mistakes and built a larger client base. Instead, the second year brought new challenges and deeper financial problems. Kevin's truck broke down repeatedly, requiring expensive repairs that ate into his already thin profit margins. He lost 2 major commercial contracts when clients complained about missed appointments and incomplete work. Jessica became pregnant with their first child, adding personal stress and medical expenses to their already strained budget. The pregnancy news was met with celebration from my parents, who were thrilled about becoming grandparents. Kevin and Jessica announced that they wanted to buy a house before the baby arrived, reasoning that they needed more space and stability for their growing family. Once again, they turned to the family for financial assistance, this time seeking help with a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom home they had found on the outskirts of town. The house was priced at $85,000, requiring a down payment of at least $8,000 to secure conventional financing. Kevin's credit was marginal due to the business debt, and Jessica's part-time income wasn't sufficient to qualify for the mortgage on their own. They needed a family member to co-sign the loan and provide the down payment, essentially guaranteeing the mortgage payments if they defaulted. My parents wanted to help but had no available funds or credit capacity to take on such a large obligation. The grocery store was struggling with competition from larger chain stores, and they had already borrowed against their home equity to help finance Kevin's wedding and business startup. Once again, they looked to me as the family member with the financial resources and stability to solve the problem. I was 20 years old at this point, still living at home and working toward my associate degree while managing increasing responsibilities. At the family store, my original college savings were gone, but I had managed to accumulate about $10,000 through careful budgeting and additional part-time work. The idea of using this money for another family loan felt overwhelming, especially since Kevin still owed me the entire original $15,000 plus accumulated interest. But Jessica was pregnant, and they needed stable housing for the baby. My parents emphasized that homeownership would provide Kevin with the stability and motivation he needed to make his business more successful. They framed the down payment as an investment in the family's future, arguing that real estate always appreciated in value and that I would ultimately benefit from helping establish Kevin and Jessica in their own home. The emotional pressure was intense. Kevin talked about how important it was for his child to grow up in a stable home environment, how renting offered no equity building or long-term security. Jessica cried when discussing their housing situation, explaining how stressed she felt about bringing a baby into a cramped rental with thin walls and unreliable heating. My parents reminded me constantly about the importance of family loyalty and how my financial help could change the trajectory of Kevin's life and his children's futures. Against my better judgment, I agreed to co-sign the mortgage and provide the down payment. The decision required me to take on legal responsibility for the entire mortgage amount while having no ownership stake in the property. If Kevin and Jessica defaulted on their payments, the bank would come after me for the full balance. I was risking my financial future and credit rating to help them achieve homeownership. We completed the house purchase in late spring, just 2 months before Jessica's due date. Kevin and Jessica were ecstatic about their new home, spending weekends painting rooms and planning the nursery. They invited our parents and me over for dinner to show off their progress, and I tried to share their enthusiasm despite my growing anxiety about the financial commitments I had undertaken on their behalf. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The baby, a beautiful girl they named Emma, arrived in July. She was healthy and perfect, with Kevin's dark hair and Jessica's bright smile. My parents were overjoyed to become grandparents, spending hours holding and fussing over their first grandchild. I loved Emma immediately and was honored when Kevin and Jessica asked me to be her godmother, a role that felt meaningful and special despite the financial complications in our family relationships. But the birth of Emma also marked the beginning of a new phase in Kevin and Jessica's financial dependence on family support. Jessica's maternity leave was unpaid, eliminating her income for 3 months. Kevin's landscaping business slowed during the summer as he tried to balance work obligations with helping care for a newborn. Their mortgage payments, utilities, and basic living expenses quickly exceeded their reduced income. Instead of addressing the fundamental problem of insufficient income, Kevin and Jessica began asking for help with specific monthly expenses. They needed assistance with the mortgage payment 1 month, help with the electric bill the next. Each request was presented as a temporary emergency that would be resolved once Jessica returned to work and Kevin caught up on his landscaping contracts. I found myself providing several $100s each month to help cover their basic expenses. Money that came from my earnings at the store and my dwindling savings account. My parents contributed what they could from the grocery store profits, but their own financial situation remained precarious. The pattern of dependency that had begun with Kevin's wedding and business startup was now becoming a permanent feature of our family dynamics. By Emma's first birthday, I had provided nearly $30,000 in direct financial assistance to Kevin and Jessica, including the original business loan, house down payment, and ongoing monthly support. None of this money had been repaid, despite repeated promises and good intentions. My own educational and career goals had been repeatedly postponed as I prioritized family financial emergencies over personal development. The grocery store was also suffering. Larger chain stores had moved into the area, offering lower prices and greater selection than our small family operation could match. My parents worked longer hours for decreasing profits, and I spent most of my free time helping manage operations and trying to develop strategies for remaining competitive in a changing market. It was during this challenging period that Jessica approached me with what she called an incredible opportunity. She had been researching real estate investment strategies and discovered that vacation rental properties on nearby lakes were generating substantial income for their owners. Wealthy tourists and seasonal residents were willing to pay premium rates for well-appointed cabins with lake access, especially during the summer months and fall color season. Jessica had identified a specific property that she believed would be perfect for this type of investment. It was a charming 2-bedroom cabin on Pine Lake, about 20 minutes from Cedar Falls, with its own dock and a beautifully wooded lot. The cabin needed some renovation work but had good bones and occupied a prime location with excellent rental potential. The asking price was $45,000, and Jessica estimated that rental income could generate $12,000 to $15,000 annually after expenses. The opportunity excited me for several reasons. Unlike my previous financial assistance to Kevin and Jessica, this would be a legitimate investment with my name on the title and direct control over the asset. I would own the cabin personally, managing the rental operations and keeping all profits for myself. Kevin and Jessica offered to handle the renovation work and ongoing maintenance in exchange for occasional personal use of the cabin for family gatherings. I had been dreaming of owning lake property since childhood, spending summer afternoons imagining what it would be like to have a peaceful retreat away from the stress and obligations of everyday life. The cabin represented both a sound financial investment and the fulfillment of a personal goal that had seemed impossible given my family's modest circumstances. After thoroughly researching the rental market and inspecting the property multiple times, I decided to purchase the cabin. I used the remainder of my savings for the down payment and secured a mortgage for the balance. Unlike the house purchase, for Kevin and Jessica, this property would be titled solely in my name, giving me complete legal ownership and control. The renovation process took several months, with Kevin providing labor while I purchased materials and managed the project. Timeline: we updated the kitchen and bathroom, refinished the hardwood floors, and created a comfortable living space that would appeal to vacation rental guests. Jessica handled the interior decorating, selecting furniture and accessories that created a cozy lakeside atmosphere. The finished cabin exceeded my expectations. It featured a stone fireplace, exposed beam ceilings, and large windows overlooking the lake. The dock provided easy access for swimming, fishing, and boating activities. The surrounding woods offered privacy and tranquility that felt like a world away from the pressures of daily life in Cedar Falls. I launched the vacation rental business during the summer season, advertising the cabin on rental websites and through local tourism offices. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. The cabin booked solid for the entire summer and fall seasons, generating exactly the income Jessica had projected. Guests left glowing reviews praising the property's charm, cleanliness, and beautiful setting. For the first time in years, I felt financially secure and optimistic about my future. The cabin rental income allowed me to reduce my hours at the family store and focus more attention on completing my college degree. I was finally able to transfer to the University of Minnesota, pursuing a business degree with a focus on hospitality management and real estate investment. The cabin also became a gathering place for our extended family. We held Emma's second birthday party there, with cousins and relatives driving from surrounding towns to celebrate at our beautiful lakeside retreat. My parents were proud that their daughter owned such a valuable property, and they enjoyed hosting family barbecues and holiday celebrations in the peaceful setting. But even during this successful period, the pattern of financial dependency continued. Kevin's landscaping business remained marginally profitable, requiring ongoing subsidies from family members to cover basic expenses. Jessica worked part-time, but struggled to balance childcare responsibilities with employment obligations. Their mortgage payments, while manageable during good months, became problematic whenever Kevin lost a major contract or had equipment problems. I continued providing emergency financial assistance several times each year, always with the understanding that these were temporary loans that would be repaid when their situation improved. The amounts seemed manageable individually, $500 here, $1,000 there, but they accumulated into substantial ongoing obligations that prevented me from building my own financial reserves. My parents began showing signs of aging and health problems that would require increased support in coming years. My father developed arthritis that made physical work difficult, and my mother was diagnosed with diabetes that required careful management and regular medical care. The grocery store profits continued declining as competition intensified, making it clear that they would eventually need to sell the business and rely on family assistance for their retirement years. Despite these mounting family obligations, I remained committed to helping everyone achieve stability and success. I believed that Kevin's business would eventually become profitable, that my parents would successfully transition into retirement, and that my own financial sacrifices would ultimately benefit the entire family. The cabin provided both emotional satisfaction and practical income that helped offset the ongoing costs of supporting my relatives. During my senior year at the University of Minnesota, I met David Kim, a fellow business student who shared my interests in real estate investment and hospitality management. David was intelligent, ambitious, and came from a Korean family that valued education and financial responsibility. We began dating during the fall semester and quickly developed a serious relationship based on shared goals and compatible values. David understood my family situation and admired my commitment to helping my relatives achieve stability. He encouraged my cabin rental business and offered valuable suggestions for expanding the operation through better marketing and property improvements. During spring break, I brought David to Cedar Falls to meet my family and see the cabin that had become such an important part of my life. The visit went well overall, though I noticed some tension between David and Kevin that I couldn't quite identify. Kevin seemed defensive about his landscaping business and made several comments about people who judged others without understanding their circumstances. David was polite but reserved, observing the family dynamics without offering much commentary. After David returned to Minneapolis, Kevin approached me with concerns about my relationship. He worried that David came from a wealthy family and might not understand our values of family loyalty and mutual support. Kevin suggested that David seemed judgmental about our close-knit relationships and financial interdependence. I dismissed Kevin's concerns, believing they stemmed from his own insecurities about his financial struggles rather than legitimate observations about David's character. David had been nothing but supportive of my family commitments and had never criticized my decisions to help Kevin and Jessica with their ongoing expenses. As graduation approached, David and I began discussing our future plans together. He had accepted a position with a commercial real estate development company in Minneapolis, while I was considering several opportunities in hospitality management and property investment. We talked about marriage and shared our dreams of building a successful business partnership alongside our personal relationship. The cabin had performed extremely well during its second season, booking solid from May through October and generating enough income to cover all expenses while providing substantial profit. I had used the earnings to pay down the mortgage and make property improvements that increased both rental rates and guest satisfaction. The success of this investment validated my belief that I had good instincts for business opportunities and financial management. But the family financial pressures continued escalating. Kevin and Jessica announced that they wanted to have another baby, despite their ongoing struggles to manage expenses with one child. Jessica had reduced her work hours even further to spend more time with Emma, leaving them increasingly dependent on Kevin's inconsistent landscaping income and regular family assistance. My parents' health problems were becoming more serious and expensive. My father required surgery for his arthritis, while my mother's diabetes medication costs were straining their already tight budget. The grocery store was losing money consistently, and they were discussing the possibility of selling it to a chain store that wanted the location for expansion. During my final semester, I received a phone call that would change everything. My grandmother, my father's mother, who had been living in a nursing home in California, had passed away at age 87. She had been ill for several months, but her death was still unexpected and devastating for my father, who had maintained a close relationship with her despite the geographical distance. More shocking than the death itself was the reading of my grandmother's will. She had accumulated substantial assets through careful saving and wise investments over her lifetime, including her home, stock investments, and bank accounts totaling nearly $200,000. The will specified that these assets should be divided equally among her surviving family members, with specific provisions for ensuring that the money would be used to benefit future generations. But there was a complication that no one had anticipated. The will required that asset distribution be managed through a family trust, with one family member serving as trustee responsible for making decisions about fund allocation according to the grandmother's written wishes and guidelines. The trustee position would carry significant responsibility and authority, essentially giving one person control over how the inheritance would be distributed among family members. My grandmother had named my parents as the primary beneficiaries, but she had also specified that the trustee should be the family member who had demonstrated the greatest financial responsibility and commitment to family welfare. The attorney handling the estate explained that this provision gave my parents discretion in selecting the trustee, but they were expected to choose someone who would honor the grandmother's intentions and manage the funds wisely. The family held several meetings to discuss the inheritance and trustee selection. Kevin immediately expressed interest in the position, arguing that as the oldest child and only son, he should naturally assume responsibility for managing family financial matters. Jessica supported this position, claiming that Kevin's business experience and understanding of investment strategies made him the logical choice. I felt differently about Kevin's qualifications for managing such a substantial sum. His landscaping business remained financially unstable, requiring ongoing family assistance despite 3 years of operation. He had never successfully repaid any of the loans I had provided, and his financial decision-making consistently prioritized immediate gratification over long-term planning. My parents were torn between their desire to honor traditional gender roles and birth order in family leadership and their practical understanding of which family member had actually demonstrated financial competence. They loved Kevin dearly and wanted to believe that managing the inheritance would give him the motivation and resources needed to achieve lasting stability. But they also recognized that I had successfully managed multiple financial responsibilities, from the family store operations to my personal real estate investment. I had completed my college degree while working multiple jobs and supporting family members through various crises. The cabin rental business demonstrated my ability to identify opportunities, execute plans, and generate sustainable income. The decision process dragged on for weeks, creating tension and awkward conversations. At family gatherings, Kevin became increasingly frustrated that his position as the family's only son wasn't automatically securing him the trustee role. He argued that my education and business success were the result of family support and sacrifice, implying that I owed the family leadership position to him in recognition of their investments in my development. I found myself in the uncomfortable position of advocating for my own qualifications while trying to maintain family harmony. I emphasized my commitment to using the inheritance funds for everyone's benefit, including supporting Kevin's business development and ensuring my parents' financial security in retirement. But I also believed that responsible management of such significant assets required proven financial competence rather than good intentions. The final decision came during a family dinner at my parents' house, with Kevin, Jessica, Emma, and me gathered around the kitchen table where we had shared so many meals and important conversations over the years. My father, speaking slowly and carefully in his accented English, announced that they had chosen me as the trustee for my grandmother's estate. Kevin's face darkened the moment my father finished speaking. The silence that followed felt heavy and dangerous, like the air before a thunderstorm. Jessica's fork clattered against her plate as she set it down with unnecessary force, and little Emma looked around the table with wide eyes, sensing the tension even though she couldn't understand its source. "Are you serious?" Kevin finally said, his voice low and controlled in a way that made my stomach clench. "You're giving control of Grandma's money to her? To Sarah?" My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and I could see the doubt creeping into his expression. This was exactly what I had feared would happen. Kevin had a way of making people question their decisions through sheer force of emotion and guilt, and my parents had always been susceptible to his manipulation tactics. "Kevin, please understand," my mother began in her gentle, peacekeeping tone. Sarah has shown that she can handle financial responsibilities. She owns the cabin. She helped with your business, she co-signed your mortgage. Exactly. Kevin interrupted, his voice rising. She helped with my business with MY money. Grandma's money. Family money that should benefit everyone equally, not be controlled by someone who thinks she's better than the rest of us because she went to college. I felt heat rising in my cheeks but forced myself to remain calm. This isn't about thinking I'm better than anyone. It's about managing the funds responsibly according to Grandma's wishes. She wanted someone who would make careful decisions about how the money gets used. Careful decisions, Jessica repeated with a bitter laugh. Like buying yourself a fancy cabin while your family struggles to pay bills? Like going to an expensive university instead of staying home to help your parents with the store? The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Everything I had done, every sacrifice I had made, every dollar I had lent or given to help them, was being twisted into evidence of my selfishness. I looked at my parents, hoping they would defend me, but they were staring at their plates, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. The cabin was purchased with my own money, I said carefully. Money I earned working multiple jobs while going to school. And it's generating income that helps support everyone. As for college, I've been working at the family store since I was 14. I think I've more than fulfilled my obligations to this family. Your obligations? Kevin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Your obligations are to this family, not to yourself. Everything you have, everything you've accomplished, is because this family supported you. We all sacrificed so you could go to school and buy property and live your perfect little life. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The revisionist history was so complete, so far from reality, that I wondered if Kevin actually believed his own words. What sacrifices did you make for my education? I paid for college myself. I worked 3 jobs to afford it. You were the one who got family money for your wedding, your business, your house down payment. And I'm grateful for that support. Kevin shot back. That's what family means. We help each other. But now that there's serious money involved, suddenly you think you deserve to control it all because you have some business degree. Emma started crying, overwhelmed by the angry voices and tension around the dinner table. Jessica immediately scooped her up, shooting accusatory looks at me as if the child's distress was my fault. Look what this is doing to our family, she said, bouncing Emma gently. Fighting over money like this. Grandma would be heartbroken. My father finally spoke up, his voice tired and strained. Maybe we should think about this more. Kevin has a point about family unity. Perhaps we could find a way to share the responsibility, or rotate the trustee position. I felt my world tilting off its axis. After everything I had done for this family, after proving my financial competence time and again, they were seriously considering changing their decision because Kevin was throwing a tantrum. Dad, the will specifically requires 1 trustee. And it requires that person to demonstrate financial responsibility. Kevin still owes me over $30,000 in unpaid loans. How is that financially responsible? Those weren't loans, Kevin said quickly. Those were family investments. Mutual support. I never agreed to formal repayment terms. I stared at him in disbelief. We have a written promissory note for the business loan. And you've been promising to pay me back for 3 years. Promises made under pressure aren't binding, Jessica added, clearly having thought about this argument in advance. You made Kevin feel guilty about asking for help, so he agreed to terms he couldn't realistically meet. The gaslighting was so blatant, so shameless, that I felt dizzy. They were rewriting history in real time, turning my generosity into manipulation and my reasonable expectations into unrealistic demands. I looked at my parents again, hoping to see recognition of how absurd these claims were, but their expressions were troubled and uncertain. Sarah, my mother said slowly, maybe Kevin is right that we should consider the family harmony aspect of this decision. Money can tear families apart if we're not careful. Money that Kevin wants to control, I pointed out. How is that different from me controlling it, except that I've actually demonstrated the ability to manage finances successfully? Because Kevin is the son, my father said quietly, and there it was. The truth underlying all the other arguments and justifications. Despite everything that had happened, despite Kevin's failures and my successes, my father still believed that male children should naturally assume family leadership roles. Kevin smiled triumphantly, sensing victory. Thank you, Dad. I know I can handle this responsibility. And I promise that everyone will benefit equally from Grandma's inheritance. Sarah included. I felt something break inside me at that moment. Not just disappointment or hurt, but a fundamental shift in how I understood my place in this family. I had spent my entire adult life believing that hard work and sacrifice would eventually earn me recognition and respect. But no matter what, I achieved. No matter how much I contributed, I would always be secondary to Kevin simply because of our birth order and gender. If that's your decision, I said, standing up from the table, then I need to make some decisions too. What does that mean? Jessica asked suspiciously. It means I need to protect my own interests since no one else will. I looked directly at Kevin. The $30,000 you owe me needs to be repaid immediately. And I'm removing myself as co-signer on your mortgage. Kevin's confident expression faltered. You can't do that. We need that mortgage to keep the house. Then you'll need to refinance or find another co-signer. I'm not taking financial responsibility for someone who doesn't honor his debts and claims family support obligations aren't real loans. Sarah, please, my mother pleaded. Don't let anger make you do something you'll regret. I'm not angry, Mom. I'm protecting myself from people who take advantage of my generosity and then claim I never actually helped them. I picked up my purse and jacket. When Kevin produces the money he owes me, we can discuss my continued involvement in this family's financial arrangements. I walked toward the door, but Kevin blocked my path. You're being ridiculous. You. No, I don't have $30,000. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before claiming you never owed it to me. I stepped around him. I'll expect payment within 30 days, or I'll be forced to take legal action to recover my money. Legal action? Jessica shrieked. Against your own family? What kind of person threatens to sue their own brother? The kind of person who gets tired of being taken advantage of, I replied. The kind of person who realizes that family loyalty only seems to go one direction in this house. I left my childhood home that night knowing that something fundamental had changed in my relationship with my family. The hurt went deeper than the money, though the financial implications were serious. It was the realization that no matter what I did, no matter how much I sacrificed, I would never be valued as an equal member of this family. The next few weeks were tense and complicated. Kevin ignored my demand for repayment, apparently believing that I wouldn't follow through on my threat to take legal action. My parents called repeatedly, asking me to reconsider my position and work things out with my brother for the sake of family peace. Jessica left voicemails accusing me of trying to destroy their family over money. I consulted with an attorney about my options for recovering the money Kevin owed me and removing myself from the mortgage co-signing arrangement. The lawyer explained that while I had legal grounds to pursue repayment of the documented loans, the co-signing situation was more complicated. Mortgage companies rarely allowed co-signers to remove themselves without the primary borrowers qualifying for refinancing on their own. Kevin and Jessica's credit and income situation made refinancing unlikely without another family member stepping in as co-signer. This meant I remained legally responsible for their mortgage payments whether I wanted to or not, at least until they sold the house or found alternative financing. The attorney also reviewed the inheritance situation and confirmed that my parents had the legal authority to designate Kevin as trustee despite my objections. Once the estate was settled and the funds transferred to the family trust, Kevin would have broad discretion over how the money was allocated and spent. Meanwhile, the family dynamics continued deteriorating. Kevin was appointed as trustee and immediately began making plans for the inheritance money. He called a family meeting to discuss his vision for using the funds, pointedly not inviting me despite my status as a beneficiary under the original will. I learned about his plans secondhand from my mother, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the escalating conflict but unwilling to take sides. Kevin wanted to use a significant portion of the inheritance to expand his landscaping business, purchasing expensive equipment and a larger truck that would allow him to take on commercial contracts. He also planned to pay off his existing business debts and establish a line of credit for future expansion. Additionally, Kevin proposed using inheritance funds to renovate his and Jessica's house, adding a second bathroom and finishing the basement to create more living space. These improvements would increase the home's value while providing better accommodations for their growing family, as Jessica was pregnant again. The remainder of the money would be set aside for my parents' retirement and medical expenses, ensuring they could sell the grocery store and live comfortably in their later years. On paper, Kevin's plan seemed reasonable and family-focused, but I noticed that none of the proposed expenditures involved repaying the money he owed me or providing any direct benefit for my contribution to the family over the years. When I pointed this out to my mother, she suggested that Kevin's business success would ultimately benefit everyone by creating a stable family enterprise that could support multiple generations. She reminded me that I already owned the cabin and had my education and career prospects, implying that I needed financial assistance less than Kevin did. This reasoning ignored the fact that my education and cabin were purchased with my own earned money, while Kevin's plans involved spending inherited funds on personal improvements and business expansion. But I was beginning to understand that logic and fairness weren't driving these decisions. Family hierarchy and traditional gender roles were determining who deserved financial support and who was expected to provide it. The breaking point came when Kevin used his trustee authority to advance himself $20,000 from the inheritance before the estate was fully settled. He claimed this was necessary to prevent losing a major commercial landscaping contract that required immediate equipment purchases. The attorney handling the estate approved the advance payment since Kevin was the designated trustee. When I learned about this transaction, I was furious. Kevin was essentially borrowing against inheritance money that belonged to all of us, using his trustee position to benefit himself personally. I demanded an explanation at another family meeting, this time insisting on being included despite the previous exclusion. The advance payment was necessary for the family business, Kevin explained calmly. If I lose this contract, the landscaping company fails, and then where would we be? Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to secure long-term success. What family business? I asked. Chen Gardens is your personal company. You own it individually, you make all the decisions, and you keep all the profits. How does your business success benefit anyone else in this family? A successful family member benefits the whole family, Jessica interjected. When Kevin does, well, he can support our parents and help with family expenses. That's how family businesses work. But he doesn't help with family expenses, I pointed out. He takes money from family members. I've been supporting his household expenses for years, and he's never repaid any of the loans I've provided. How is advancing him more inheritance money going to change that pattern? My parents looked uncomfortable but didn't contradict my assessment. They knew I was right about the money flow in our family, but acknowledging it would require admitting that their decision to make Kevin the trustee was based on favoritism rather than financial competence. The business is finally becoming profitable, Kevin insisted. This contract will put us over the top. Within a year, I'll be able to repay all family debts and start contributing to household expenses instead of requiring assistance. I had heard these promises many times before, always accompanied by requests for additional financial support to achieve the promised success. Kevin's optimism was genuine, but his business planning was consistently unrealistic. He underestimated costs, overestimated revenues, and failed to account for seasonal fluctuations and unexpected expenses that affected landscaping operations. If the business is becoming profitable, why do you need inheritance money to keep it going? I asked. And why haven't you been able to repay any of the money you've borrowed from me over the past 4 years? Business cash flow is complicated, Kevin replied defensively. Revenue doesn't always come in when you need it. Having access to capital allows me to take advantage of opportunities and smooth out the timing issues. That's what business loans are for. Banks provide capital to profitable businesses. If your company is as successful as you claim, you should be able to get commercial financing instead of using family inheritance money. Kevin's expression hardened. Banks don't understand small businesses like Chen Gardens. They want collateral and credit history that doesn't reflect the real potential of what I'm building. The truth was that Kevin couldn't qualify for business loans because his company wasn't actually profitable and he had poor credit from previous financial mistakes. But admitting this would undermine his justification for controlling the inheritance money and advancing funds to himself. The argument continued for over an hour, with my parents trying to mediate between Kevin's defensive explanations and my practical objections. Jessica accused me of being jealous of Kevin's success and trying to sabotage his business opportunities. Kevin claimed I was being selfish and unsupportive of family goals. Finally, my father ended the discussion by declaring that Kevin's decision as trustee would stand. The advance payment had already been approved and disbursed, and questioning it further would only create more family discord. He asked everyone to support Kevin's leadership and trust that his business expertise would benefit the entire family. I left that meeting knowing that my relationship with my family had fundamentally changed. They had chosen Kevin's leadership despite his proven financial irresponsibility, and they expected me to accept this decision without further objection. Any criticism of Kevin's trustee decisions would be viewed as disloyalty to the family unit. Over the following months, I watched Kevin spend the inheritance money exactly as I had predicted. The new equipment purchases did allow him to bid on larger contracts, but his pricing remained competitive to the point of minimal profitability. The truck payments, insurance costs, and maintenance expenses for the expanded operation absorbed most of the additional revenue. The house renovation projects went significantly over budget, as Kevin insisted on higher-end finishes and additions that weren't included in the original plans. Jessica convinced him that spending a little more upfront would add substantial value to the property, justifying the additional expense as a sound investment. Meanwhile, Kevin's existing business debts remained unpaid, including the money he owed me. When I asked about repayment schedules, he explained that the business expansion required all available cash flow for the first year. Once the new contracts were fully operational and the renovation projects were complete, he would be able to address outstanding family loans. I was also dealing with my own financial pressures during this period. The cabin rental business remained successful, but I was struggling to manage mortgage payments on both the cabin and my co-signer responsibility for Kevin's house while supporting myself through graduate school. I had decided to pursue a master's degree in business administration, believing that advanced education would provide better career opportunities and financial independence. My relationship with David was also becoming more serious, and we were discussing marriage plans for the following year. David understood my family situation but was increasingly concerned about my ongoing financial entanglement with Kevin's obligation. He worried that co-signing Kevin's mortgage would affect our ability to qualify for our own home loan when we were ready to buy property together. These concerns proved justified when David and I applied for pre-approval on a mortgage for a condo we wanted to purchase near Minneapolis. The lender counted Kevin's mortgage as part of my debt-to-income ratio, significantly reducing the loan amount we could qualify for. We would need to find less expensive housing or wait until my income increased substantially through career advancement. I was caught in a financial trap created by my family's decisions and expectations. My generosity and family loyalty had resulted in legal obligations that limited my personal opportunities and future planning. Meanwhile, Kevin was using inheritance money to improve his business and home while I remained responsible for his housing costs and unpaid debts. The situation became even more complicated when Jessica gave birth to their second child, a son they named Michael. Kevin was ecstatic about having a son to carry on the family name and potentially inherit the landscaping business someday. My parents were equally thrilled about their new grandson and spent considerable time and energy helping with childcare and household support. The new baby also provided additional justification for Kevin's spending decisions. He argued that expanding the house and business was necessary to provide security for his growing family and ensure that his children would have better opportunities than previous generations had enjoyed. Family money spent on Kevin's success was reframed as investment in the grandchildren's futures. But the pattern of financial dependency continued despite the inheritance windfall. Kevin and Jessica still required assistance with monthly expenses, claiming that the business expansion and house renovation had created temporary cash flow challenges. They asked my parents and me to help with utilities, groceries, and childcare costs while they waited for the new business contracts to generate steady income. I was tired of providing emergency assistance for expenses that should have been covered by Kevin's supposedly successful business. I was also frustrated that inheritance money intended to provide family financial security was being used for expansion projects that seemed to require additional ongoing support rather than creating actual independence. When Kevin asked me to help with their electric bill one month, I finally said no. I explained that I was dealing with my own financial pressures from co-signing their mortgage and that I couldn't continue subsidizing their household expenses while Kevin used inheritance money for business and home improvements. Kevin was furious with my refusal to help. He accused me of being selfish and abandoning the family during a temporary difficult period. Jessica called me heartless for letting them struggle with basic expenses when I owned valuable property and had a good income from the cabin rentals. My parents were disappointed in my lack of family solidarity and suggested that I was being petty about the trustee decision by withholding support from Kevin's family. They reminded me that Kevin was working hard to build something that would benefit everyone eventually, and that family members should support each other during challenging transitions. The guilt and pressure were intense, but I held firm in my decision. I had provided tens of thousands of dollars in assistance over the years, and I was still legally responsible for Kevin's mortgage payments. I couldn't continue enabling their poor financial management while sacrificing my own goals and opportunities. This decision marked the beginning of my gradual separation from the family's financial interdependence. I stopped attending the monthly family meetings where Kevin discussed his business plans and spending decisions as trustee. I avoided family gatherings where money and financial assistance were likely topics of conversation. Instead, I focused on completing my MBA program and building my own career prospects. The cabin rental business continued performing well, and I was exploring opportunities to expand into property management for other vacation rental owners. David and I postponed our wedding plans until we could resolve the housing situation, but our relationship remained strong and supportive. I also began working with a financial advisor to plan for long-term wealth building that wouldn't depend on family cooperation or inheritance money. I wanted to ensure that my future financial security was based on my own efforts and decisions rather than the whims of family dynamics and gender-based favoritism. The distance I created from family financial involvement was emotionally difficult but practically necessary. I loved my parents, my brother, and my niece and nephew, but I couldn't continue sacrificing my own interests for people who didn't appreciate my contributions or respect my financial competence. Meanwhile, Kevin's business expansion wasn't producing the promised results. The new contracts required more labor and equipment maintenance than he had anticipated, eating into profit margins. Several clients complained about missed deadlines and incomplete work, leading to disputes over payment and negative reviews that affected his ability to attract new customers. The house renovation projects were also creating unexpected problems. Some of the work hadn't been properly permitted, requiring expensive modifications to meet building codes. Kevin had attempted to save money by doing much of the work himself, but his lack of experience with plumbing and electrical systems resulted in costly mistakes that required professional correction. By the end of the year, Kevin had spent nearly 80% of the inheritance money but hadn't achieved the financial stability and business success he had promised. His landscaping company remained marginally profitable, requiring ongoing subsidies from the remaining inheritance funds to cover operating expenses and equipment payments. The family was beginning to recognize that Kevin's optimistic projections hadn't materialized, but no one wanted to admit that the trustee decision had been a mistake. My parents continued supporting Kevin's leadership publicly while privately expressing concerns about how quickly the inheritance money was being depleted. I maintained my distance from these family financial discussions, but I couldn't completely avoid the consequences of Kevin's poor decision-making. As co-signer on his mortgage, I was legally responsible if he defaulted on payments. As his sister, I was emotionally invested in his success despite my frustration with his choices. The tension came to a head during the Christmas holiday gathering. At my parents' house, Kevin was noticeably stressed about business pressures and upcoming equipment payments. Jessica was overwhelmed with managing 2 young children while trying to help with the landscaping company's bookkeeping. My parents looked tired and worried about the family's financial situation. During dinner, Kevin announced that he needed to make some difficult decisions about the business and the inheritance fund management. The commercial contracts weren't generating enough profit to sustain the expanded operation, and he was considering scaling back to a smaller, more manageable size. This scaling back would require selling some of the recently purchased equipment at a loss and potentially laying off the employees he had hired for the larger contracts. It would also mean acknowledging that the business expansion had failed, and that a significant portion of the inheritance money had been wasted on unsuccessful ventures. Kevin asked the family to support him through this transition period and to consider providing additional assistance to help stabilize the business at a smaller scale. He suggested that everyone contribute what they could to prevent the complete collapse of Chen Gardens and the loss of everything he had worked to build. I listened to this request with a mixture of sadness and vindication. Kevin was essentially asking for a bailout after spending the family inheritance on expansion plans that I had questioned from the beginning. He wanted additional financial support from family members who had already contributed far more than they could afford to his various ventures. When Kevin finished his presentation, the room was quiet except for the sound of my young nephew playing with his toys in the corner. Everyone was processing the implications of what they had heard and considering their response to yet another request for financial assistance. Finally, I spoke up. Kevin, I appreciate your honesty about the business situation, but I can't provide any additional financial support. I'm still co-signing your mortgage, which means I'm already responsible for your housing costs. And you still owe me over $30,000 from previous loans that haven't been repaid. Kevin's face reddened. Those weren't loans, Sarah. That was family investment in building something together. And the mortgage co-signing benefits you too, since you're part of this family and we all benefit when family members succeed. How does your mortgage benefit me? I asked. I have legal responsibility for payments but no ownership stake in the property. If you default, the bank comes after me for the full balance, but I get nothing if the house appreciates in value. You get the benefit of having family members with stable housing, Jessica interjected. You get the benefit of knowing your niece and nephew have a good home environment. That should matter more than money. I was tired of having my legitimate financial concerns dismissed as greed or lack of family loyalty. Of course I want Emma and Michael to have stable housing. But that responsibility belongs to their parents, not to their aunt. I've already sacrificed enough of my own financial security to support this family. My mother tried to mediate the growing tension. Maybe we could find a compromise. Kevin could sell some equipment to repay part of what he owes Sarah, and then we could all work together to help stabilize the business at a smaller scale. With what money? I asked. Kevin has spent most of the inheritance. You and Dad don't have savings to contribute. And I'm already financially overextended because of the mortgage co-signing and previous loans. Where is this additional assistance supposed to come from? The question hung in the air because everyone knew the answer. There was no additional money available from family sources. Kevin had spent the inheritance expecting that his business expansion would generate enough income to repay debts and support ongoing operations. When that didn't happen, there were no backup resources to draw from. Kevin's desperation was becoming more apparent as he realized that his family wasn't going to provide another financial rescue. "Fine," he said angrily. "If you won't help, then I'll figure out other solutions. But don't expect me to prioritize repaying old debts when I'm trying to save the business and keep my family housed and fed." I felt a chill of recognition at his words. Kevin was essentially saying that he had no intention of repaying the money he owed me and that he expected me to continue co-signing his mortgage indefinitely while he figured out how to make his business viable. I was trapped in a situation where I bore financial responsibility without having any control over the decisions that affected my obligations. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called David and told him about the family meeting and Kevin's latest requests for assistance. We talked for over an hour about our options and the implications of remaining financially entangled with my family's problems. David was supportive but realistic about the situation. He pointed out that my family would continue making financial demands as long as I remained available to meet them. Kevin would never become financially independent if he could always rely on family bailouts, and my parents would continue enabling his poor decisions rather than holding him accountable. We decided that I needed to establish firm boundaries and protect my own financial interests even if it meant accepting family disapproval and emotional consequences. I couldn't save Kevin's business or solve my family's financial problems, but I could prevent further damage to my own financial stability and future prospects. The next morning, I called Kevin and informed him that I would be removing myself as co-signer on his mortgage within 60 days. If he couldn't qualify for refinancing on his own or find another family member to take my place, he would need to sell the house and find alternative housing arrangements. I also informed him that I would be pursuing legal action to recover the money he owed me if payment arrangements weren't established immediately. I had been patient and understanding for years, but his latest refusal to prioritize debt repayment made it clear that voluntary compliance was not forthcoming. Kevin was furious and accused me of trying to destroy his family out of spite over the inheritance decision. He claimed that I was being vindictive and selfish, choosing money over family relationships. He threatened to turn the entire family against me if I followed through on my ultimatum. I had expected this reaction and was prepared for the emotional manipulation. "Kevin, I've supported your family financially for years while you've made one poor decision after another. I've co-signed your mortgage, lent you money for your business, and helped with your household expenses. In return, you've spent inheritance money on failed expansion plans and refused to repay legitimate debts. I can't continue enabling this pattern. You can't just abandon family when things get difficult," Kevin replied. "What kind of person threatens their own brother with lawsuits and financial ruin? The kind of person who finally understands that family loyalty has to go both ways," I said. "You've taken advantage of my generosity for years, and now you're asking for more help while refusing to honor your existing obligations. That's not family loyalty. That's exploitation." I hung up the phone knowing that Kevin would immediately call our parents and Jessica to rally support for his position. They would pressure me to reconsider my decision and continue providing financial support despite the ongoing problems with Kevin's management and accountability. But I had reached my breaking point. I was tired of being the family member who was expected to sacrifice for everyone else's benefit while receiving no recognition or appreciation for my contributions. I was tired of having my financial competence ignored when inheritance decisions were made but relied upon when emergency assistance was needed. Most importantly, I was tired of limiting my own opportunities and future planning to accommodate family members who consistently made poor decisions and expected others to bear the consequences. I had my own life to build, my own goals to pursue, and my own financial security to protect. The decision to establish boundaries and pursue legal remedies felt scary but liberating. For the first time in years, I was prioritizing my own interests over family expectations and demands. I didn't know how the situation would ultimately resolve, but I knew that continuing the current pattern of financial codependency wasn't sustainable or healthy for anyone involved. As I prepared for the legal and emotional battles ahead, I reminded myself that I had done nothing wrong by helping my family over the years. My generosity and loyalty had been genuine, even if they weren't appreciated or reciprocated. But I couldn't continue sacrificing my own well-being for people who viewed my assistance as an entitlement rather than a gift. The real test would come in the following weeks as Kevin and the rest of my family responded to my ultimatum. I expected guilt trips, emotional manipulation, and attempts to turn family members against me. But I also hoped that firm boundaries might finally force some accountability and realistic assessment of our family's financial dynamics. Either way, I was committed to protecting my own interests and building a future that didn't depend on family approval or cooperation. I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is to stop enabling their destructive patterns, even when they don't appreciate the lesson at the time. The phone calls started immediately. My mother reached out first, her voice trembling with concern and disappointment. She begged me to reconsider my decision, explaining how devastating it would be for Emma and Michael to lose their home because of adult disagreements. She painted vivid pictures of my young niece and nephew being uprooted from their neighborhood, their friends, their sense of security and stability. "Sarah, please think about what you're doing," she pleaded during one particularly emotional conversation. "Kevin made mistakes, yes, but destroying his family won't fix anything. Those children are innocent in all of this. How can you live with yourself knowing you caused them to lose their home?" The guilt was overwhelming, exactly as my mother intended. She knew my weak spots and was applying pressure with surgical precision. But I forced myself to remember that I wasn't the one who had made irresponsible financial decisions or failed to honor legitimate debts. Kevin had created this situation through years of poor choices and unrealistic expectations about family financial support. "Mom, I'm not destroying Kevin's family," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Kevin destroyed his own financial stability by spending inheritance money on failed business ventures and refusing to repay legitimate loans. I can't continue enabling his poor decisions by remaining financially responsible for his obligations." "But your family," she insisted. "Family doesn't abandon each other when times get difficult. Your father and I raised you to understand that we support each other through thick and thin." I had heard this argument countless times, but now I recognized it for what it was: emotional manipulation designed to maintain a status quo that benefited Kevin at my expense. Family loyalty was only invoked when they needed something from me, never when I needed support or consideration for my own interests and well-being. My father's approach was different but equally predictable. He called to inform me that my behavior was bringing shame to the family name and disrespecting the values he and my mother had worked so hard to instill in their children. According to him, threatening legal action against family members was unacceptable under any circumstances, regardless of the financial justifications I might claim. "In our culture, family honor matters more than money," he said sternly. "You're acting like these Americans who sue each other over every disagreement. That's not who we are, Sarah. That's not how we were raised." The cultural guilt was particularly effective because it struck at my deepest insecurities about fitting in and honoring my heritage. But I had learned enough about manipulation tactics to recognize that my parents were selectively applying cultural values when they served their purposes while ignoring them when they didn't. "Dad, in our culture, doesn't honor also include keeping your word and repaying your debts?" I asked. "Kevin has borrowed money from me for years without repaying any of it. He's used inheritance money irresponsibly and expects me to continue covering his mortgage indefinitely. How is that honorable behavior?" My father was silent for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with the logical contradiction I had identified. Finally, he said, "Kevin is trying his best to build something for the family. Sometimes building requires patience and understanding from everyone involved." "Patience and understanding have to go both ways," I replied. "I've been patient for years while Kevin made one poor financial decision after another. I've been understanding about his business struggles and personal challenges. But patience without accountability just enables destructive behavior." The conversation ended badly, with my father expressing deep disappointment in my choices and warning that I would regret prioritizing money over family relationships. His words stung, but I was beginning to understand that my parents' disapproval was based on their own discomfort with conflict rather than any objective assessment of right and wrong. Jessica's response was the most aggressive and emotionally manipulative. She left voicemails accusing me of jealousy over Kevin's role as trustee and claiming that I was trying to punish him for being chosen over me. According to her narrative, I was a bitter, selfish woman who couldn't stand seeing my brother succeed and was willing to destroy his family to satisfy my own wounded ego. "You've always resented Kevin for being the son, for getting attention and support that you thought you deserved," she said in one particularly venomous message. "Now you're using money as a weapon to hurt him because you can't stand that he's building something meaningful while you're just collecting rent from strangers in your little cabin." The personal attacks were designed to make me question my own motivations and feel guilty about standing up for my financial interests. Jessica wanted me to believe that my objections to Kevin's behavior were rooted in sibling rivalry rather than legitimate concerns about fiscal responsibility and family financial abuse. But her attacks also revealed important information about how Kevin and Jessica viewed my contributions to the family. My cabin rental business wasn't seen as a legitimate entrepreneurial success but as easy money that required no real effort or skill. My financial assistance to Kevin over the years was minimized as insignificant compared to his supposedly ambitious business building efforts. Most telling was Jessica's complete dismissal of the money Kevin owed me. In her version of events, my loans to Kevin were gifts that I was now trying to retract out of spite. The promissory notes and repayment agreements were irrelevant because family members shouldn't expect formal repayment for mutual support and assistance. This revisionist history was breathtaking in its audacity, but it helped me understand how Kevin and Jessica justified their financial behavior. They had convinced themselves that family money belonged to whoever needed it most at any given moment, with need determined by their own assessment of whose goals and obligations were most important. While dealing with family pressure and emotional manipulation, I was also moving forward with legal action to protect my interests. My attorney filed paperwork to initiate debt recovery proceedings against Kevin for the documented loans that remained unpaid. The formal legal notice seemed to shock Kevin into taking my ultimatum seriously for the first time. He called me directly, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. "I can't believe you're actually going through with this. Taking your own brother to court over money. Do you understand how this looks to everyone who knows us?" "I understand how years of unpaid debts look," I replied. "I understand how spending inheritance money on failed business ventures looks. I understand how expecting family members to subsidize your lifestyle indefinitely looks." "It's not about subsidizing my lifestyle," Kevin protested. "It's about supporting family business development and ensuring that everyone benefits from our collective success. When Chen Gardens becomes profitable, you'll benefit too." I had heard this promise so many times that it had lost all meaning. Kevin's definition of eventual profitability seemed to shift constantly, always remaining just out of reach despite ongoing investments and optimistic projections. Meanwhile, his debts continued accumulating while he spent inherited money on expansion plans that weren't generating sustainable income. "Kevin, your business has been operating for 4 years without generating enough profit to repay existing loans or cover basic family expenses," I pointed out. "How much more time and money should I invest in a venture that consistently fails to meet its financial projections?" "Success takes time," Kevin insisted. "Every business goes through difficult periods before achieving profitability. The inheritance money was supposed to provide the capital needed to reach the next level. And instead it's been spent on equipment and renovations that haven't improved the business's fundamental problems," I countered. "You still struggle with pricing, client management, and seasonal cash flow. Buying more equipment didn't solve those underlying issues." Kevin was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the frustration in his breathing. Finally, he said, "What do you want from me, Sarah?" "I'm doing the best I can with a difficult situation. I'm trying to build something that will support our family for generations. I want you to honor your debts and take responsibility for your financial decisions," I said simply. "I want you to stop expecting other people to bear the consequences of your poor business planning. And I want you to understand that family loyalty doesn't mean unlimited financial support without accountability." "And if I can't do that?" Kevin asked, though we both knew he couldn't meet these reasonable expectations without fundamentally changing his approach to business and family financial relationships. "Then we'll let the courts determine fair resolution of our financial disputes," I replied. "I'm not trying to hurt you or your family, Kevin. I'm trying to protect myself from further financial damage caused by your irresponsible decisions." The call ended with Kevin making vague promises to explore repayment options while simultaneously complaining about the unfairness of my timeline and expectations. I knew he had no realistic plan for coming up with $30,000 or qualifying for mortgage refinancing on his own, but I also knew that continuing to enable his financial dependency wasn't helping anyone. Meanwhile, the pressure to reconsider my position was intensifying from multiple directions. Extended family members who had heard about the conflict began calling to express their opinions and offer unsolicited advice. Most sided with Kevin, viewing my legal action as an extreme overreaction to normal family financial difficulties. My cousin Linda, who lived in California and rarely spoke to any of us except during major holidays, called to lecture me about the importance of family solidarity and cultural values. According to her, threatening legal action against family members was a betrayal of everything our grandparents had sacrificed to build in America. "Your grandmother would be heartbroken to see family members fighting over money like this," Linda said reproachfully. "She worked so hard to keep the family united and prosperous. Now you're tearing it apart because you can't be patient with Kevin's business development process." I wanted to point out that Linda had never contributed anything to Kevin's various financial crises and had no understanding of the actual dynamics involved, but I recognized that arguing with uninformed relatives would only create additional family drama without changing anything substantive about my situation. Other family members expressed similar sentiments, generally supporting Kevin's position while criticizing my decision to pursue legal remedies. The consensus seemed to be that family financial disputes should be resolved privately through negotiation and compromise rather than formal legal processes that might become public knowledge. This attitude reflected a deep discomfort with conflict and accountability that had enabled Kevin's financial irresponsibility for years. Everyone preferred to maintain surface harmony rather than address underlying problems that were creating ongoing instability and resentment. But not everyone in the family supported Kevin's position. My cousin Janet, who worked as an accountant and understood business finance, called to express private support for my decision. She had observed Kevin's financial patterns over the years and recognized that my legal action was a last resort after years of unsuccessful attempts to resolve disputes through family negotiations. "You've been more than patient with Kevin," Janet said during a confidential phone conversation. "Most people would have taken legal action years ago instead of continuing to provide financial assistance to someone who consistently fails to honor their obligations." Janet also shared her professional perspective on Kevin's business management and trustee performance. Based on her observations of family financial discussions, she believed that Kevin lacked the skills and discipline necessary for successful business operations and responsible inheritance management. "Kevin means well, but good intentions don't substitute for financial competence," she explained. "The inheritance money could have provided security for your parents' retirement and educational opportunities for the grandchildren. Instead, it's being wasted on business experiments that aren't generating sustainable returns." These conversations helped me understand that my assessment of the family financial situation wasn't unreasonable or overly harsh. Other family members with business experience recognized the same patterns and problems that I had identified, even if they weren't willing to express their concerns publicly. However, their private support didn't translate into public backing when family pressure intensified around my legal action. Janet and others preferred to avoid taking sides in family conflicts, leaving me to face criticism and manipulation tactics alone while they maintained neutrality and surface relationships with everyone involved. This dynamic reinforced my understanding that family loyalty was largely performative rather than substantive. People supported family unity when it was convenient and comfortable but avoided taking stands that might require personal sacrifice or difficult conversations about accountability and responsibility. As the legal process moved forward, Kevin's desperation became more apparent. He began exploring increasingly unrealistic solutions to avoid mortgage default and debt repayment obligations. He contacted several banks about refinancing options, but his poor credit and insufficient income made qualification impossible without a cosigner or substantial down payment. Kevin also investigated business loan possibilities, hoping to consolidate his debts and obligations under commercial financing that wouldn't require family guarantees. But his business financial records showed inconsistent profitability and high debt-to-income ratios that made him an unacceptable risk for most lenders. Meanwhile, Jessica was exploring part-time employment opportunities that might supplement their household income enough to manage mortgage payments independently. But childcare costs for 2 young children would consume most of her potential earnings, making additional employment economically impractical. The reality of their financial situation was becoming undeniable. Kevin and Jessica had been living beyond their means for years, subsidized by family assistance and inheritance money that was now exhausted. Without ongoing external support, they couldn't maintain their current lifestyle or housing arrangements. This recognition led to increasingly desperate attempts to negotiate alternative arrangements that would allow them to avoid the consequences of their financial decisions. Kevin proposed extended repayment schedules that would stretch debt obligations over decades at minimal monthly amounts. Jessica suggested that I could maintain mortgage co-signing responsibilities in exchange for partial ownership of their house. These proposals were creative but unrealistic. Extended repayment schedules would leave me financially exposed for years while providing minimal actual debt reduction. Partial ownership of Kevin's house would create complex legal entanglements, without addressing the fundamental problem of their inability to manage household finances responsibly. I declined these alternative arrangements, explaining that I needed complete separation from Kevin's financial obligations rather than modified versions of the same problematic relationships. My goal wasn't to punish Kevin or his family but to protect my own financial security and future planning from their ongoing instability. This refusal to accept compromise solutions further intensified family criticism of my position. My parents and other relatives viewed my inflexibility as evidence that I was more interested in hurting Kevin than resolving family disputes constructively. They interpreted my firm boundaries as vindictiveness rather than necessary self-protection. The emotional toll of maintaining these boundaries while facing constant family pressure was significant. I found myself questioning whether I was being unreasonably harsh or inflexible, whether family relationships should take priority over financial considerations, whether my legal action would cause irreparable damage to relationships I valued. Despite their problems, these doubts were particularly intense during family gatherings and holidays when the conflict created obvious tension and discomfort for everyone involved. Emma and Michael were too young to understand the adult disagreements, but they sensed the strained atmosphere and asked innocent questions about why family members seemed upset with each other. During one particularly difficult Christmas celebration, Emma asked me directly why I wasn't hugging Uncle Kevin like I usually did during family visits. Her innocent question highlighted how my conflict with Kevin was affecting the entire family dynamic and potentially damaging relationships with the next generation. I struggled to explain the situation in age-appropriate terms that wouldn't burden Emma with adult problems while also being honest about why family relationships had become complicated. I told her that sometimes grown-ups have disagreements about important matters and need time to work things out, but that my love for her and Michael would never change regardless of adult conflicts. These conversations with my niece and nephew were heartbreaking because they reminded me of what was at stake beyond the financial disputes. I genuinely loved Emma and Michael and wanted to maintain close relationships with them as they grew up. But I also couldn't continue enabling their parents' financial irresponsibility just to preserve surface harmony at family gatherings. The tension reached a breaking point when Kevin made a desperate decision that revealed the true extent of his financial desperation and poor judgment. Without consulting anyone in the family, he took out a second mortgage on his house, using the equity to generate cash for business operations and debt payments. The second mortgage provided Kevin with about $20,000 in immediate cash, money he used to make partial payments on business debts and equipment loans. He also used some of the funds to make a token payment toward what he owed me, apparently hoping that this gesture would convince me to drop my legal action and continue co-signing the primary mortgage. When Kevin informed me about the second mortgage and offered me $3,000 as partial debt repayment, I was simultaneously relieved and horrified. I was glad to receive some repayment after years of broken promises, but I was shocked that Kevin had taken on additional debt without considering how it would affect his already precarious financial situation. The second mortgage significantly increased Kevin's total housing costs and left him with even less equity in the property. If housing values declined or he needed to sell quickly, he might not recover enough money to pay off both mortgages. The additional debt also made it even less likely that he could qualify for refinancing that would remove me as co-signer on the primary mortgage. "Kevin, what were you thinking?" I asked when he called to inform me about the second mortgage and partial payment. "You've just made your financial situation significantly worse by taking on more debt that you can't afford." "I had to do something," Kevin replied defensively. "You were threatening to force us out of our house through legal action. The second mortgage gives me breathing room to stabilize the business and work out payment arrangements with everyone I owe money to." "But you still can't afford the combined mortgage payments," I pointed out. "Now you have 2 mortgage payments instead of 1, plus all your existing business debts and operating expenses. How is that an improvement?" Kevin was silent for a moment, apparently not having considered the long-term implications of his decision. Finally, he said, "The business is starting to turn around. The spring season looks promising, and I have several large contracts lined up that should generate enough income to cover all expenses." I had heard these optimistic projections many times before, always accompanied by requests for additional financial assistance or patience with debt repayment schedules. Kevin's ability to believe his own unrealistic revenue forecasts was remarkable, but it didn't change the mathematical reality of his financial obligations. "Kevin, even if your business performs exactly as you're projecting, which it never has in the past, you'll barely have enough income to cover living expenses and mortgage payments," I said. "There won't be surplus income for debt repayment or business reinvestment. There will be if everyone stops demanding immediate repayment and gives the business time to reach full profitability," Kevin countered. "Success requires investment and patience, not constant pressure and threats." This conversation crystallized my understanding that Kevin would never voluntarily change his financial behavior or take responsibility for his decisions. He would continue making poor choices and expecting family members to bear the consequences while he pursued increasingly unrealistic business fantasies. The $3,000 payment was clearly intended to buy my patience and goodwill rather than representing genuine commitment to debt repayment. Kevin hoped that this token gesture would convince me to drop legal action and continue co-signing his mortgage while he worked through his latest financial crisis. But I had learned that accepting partial payments and extended timelines just enabled Kevin's irresponsible behavior while prolonging my own financial exposure. Instead of viewing the payment as progress, I saw it as confirmation that Kevin had access to money when he chose to prioritize repayment but preferred to spend available funds on other priorities. I informed Kevin that while I appreciated the partial payment, it didn't change my position regarding mortgage co-signing or the remaining debt balance. I would continue pursuing legal action for full debt recovery and would still require him to refinance or sell the house to remove me from mortgage obligations. Kevin was furious with my response, apparently expecting that any payment would satisfy my demands and restore our previous financial arrangement. He accused me of moving the goalposts and being impossible to satisfy regardless of his good faith efforts to address our disputes. "Nothing I do is ever enough for you," he said angrily. "I make a substantial payment, and you still threaten my family's housing security. What do you actually want from me?" "I want complete separation from your financial obligations," I replied calmly. "I want the remaining $27,000 you owe me, and I want my name removed from your mortgage." "These aren't unreasonable demands, Kevin. They're necessary steps to protect my own financial interests." "And if I can't do that immediately?" Kevin asked, though we both knew he couldn't meet these requirements without external assistance or major lifestyle changes. "Then we'll let the legal system determine fair resolution," I said. "I'm not trying to hurt you or your family, but I can't continue being financially responsible for your decisions when you won't take responsibility for them yourself." The conversation ended with Kevin making vague threats about family consequences and social embarrassment if I continued pursuing legal action. He suggested that forcing family disputes into public court proceedings would damage everyone's reputation and make future family relationships impossible. These threats revealed Kevin's continued belief that family loyalty should protect him from accountability for his financial behavior. He expected that concern about family harmony and social appearances would override my practical need to protect my own interests and recover money he legitimately owed me. But I had moved beyond caring about family approval or social perceptions of our conflict. I was tired of being expected to sacrifice my own well-being to maintain surface harmony while Kevin made increasingly irresponsible decisions that affected everyone around him. The legal process continued moving forward despite family pressure and Kevin's desperate attempts to negotiate alternative arrangements. My attorney assured me that the debt recovery case was straightforward given the documented loans and Kevin's acknowledgement of the obligations. The mortgage co-signing situation was more complex, but Kevin's second mortgage actually strengthened my position by demonstrating his inability to manage housing costs responsibly. Meanwhile, I was building a life that didn't depend on family, financial entanglements or approval. David and I had found a smaller condo that we could afford without counting Kevin's mortgage against my debt obligations. We were planning a modest wedding for the following year, funded entirely by our own savings and earnings. The cabin rental business continued performing well, generating steady income that allowed me to pursue additional property investments. I was exploring opportunities to purchase a second vacation rental property, possibly expanding into property management services for other owners who wanted professional assistance with their rental operations. These developments represented the future I was building for myself, based on my own efforts and decisions rather than family dynamics and obligations. I was finally learning to prioritize my own goals and interests instead of sacrificing them for family members who didn't appreciate my contributions or respect my financial competence. The distance I had created from family financial involvement was emotionally difficult but practically liberating. I could make decisions based on sound financial principles rather than guilt and manipulation tactics. I could plan for long-term goals without worrying about unexpected family crises that would derail my progress. Most importantly, I was learning to value myself and my contributions appropriately rather than accepting whatever recognition family members were willing to provide. I didn't need Kevin's approval or my parents' praise to know that I had worked hard and achieved meaningful success through my own efforts. As spring approached and Kevin's latest business projections proved as unrealistic as previous forecasts, the consequences of years of poor financial decisions were becoming undeniable. The landscaping company was struggling with cash flow problems. Despite the inheritance investment and seasonal upturn in demand, Kevin's equipment payments and operating expenses consumed most of his revenue, leaving little profit for debt repayment or family support. The second mortgage payment added significant pressure to household finances, forcing Jessica to seek additional part-time employment despite childcare challenges. Their financial stress was obvious to everyone in the family, but no one wanted To acknowledge that Kevin's business model was fundamentally flawed and that additional investment wouldn't solve the underlying problems. It was easier to hope that persistence and family support would eventually lead to success than to admit that years of financial assistance had been wasted on an unviable venture. I watched this deteriorating situation with a mixture of sadness and vindication. I felt sorry for Emma and Michael, who were innocent victims of their parents' poor decisions. I felt frustrated that my parents continued enabling Kevin's irresponsible behavior instead of encouraging him to make realistic assessments of his situation. But I also felt validated in my decision to establish boundaries and protect my own interests. Kevin's latest financial crisis proved that his problems weren't temporary setbacks that could be resolved with additional family assistance. They were fundamental flaws in his business planning and financial management that required honest assessment and realistic solutions. The legal proceedings were nearing resolution, with Kevin facing court-ordered debt repayment and potential foreclosure if he couldn't manage mortgage obligations independently. The prospect of losing their house was finally forcing Kevin and Jessica to consider options they had previously rejected, including selling the property and finding more affordable housing. This potential outcome was exactly what I had been trying to help them avoid through years of financial assistance and patient negotiation. But Kevin's refusal to address underlying problems had made dramatic consequences inevitable, and I could no longer protect him from the results of his own choices. As I prepared for the final phase of our legal and family conflict, I reminded myself that I had done everything possible to help Kevin succeed while protecting my own interests. I had provided financial assistance, business advice, and emotional support for years without receiving appreciation or reciprocity. Now it was time to let Kevin face the consequences of his decisions without my intervention or protection. Whether he learned from this experience and developed more realistic approaches to business and family finance remained to be seen, but I could no longer sacrifice my own well-being to shield him from reality. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.